Greed has a funny way of blinding the powerful. In the high-stakes world of New York real estate and tech, arrogance is often the first step toward a fatal fall. When Henry Prescott, a man worth $4 billion, walked into courtroom 4B, he thought he was simply discarding an outdated wife to make room for a younger model. He didn't know that the woman sitting quietly at the defendant's table wasn't just his spouse. She was his landlord, his creditor, and the architect of his entire existence. This isn't just a divorce case, it's a masterclass in patience, silence, and the ultimate revenge. The sleek, obsidian-black Maybach pulled up to the curb of Le Bernardin in Midtown Manhattan. It was October 14th, a Tuesday, and the rain was coming down in sheets, blurring the city lights into streaks of neon and grey. Henry Prescott stepped out first. At 54, he was the picture of engineered vitality, hair dyed a rich chestnut, teeth veneered to a blinding white, and wearing a bespoke Brioni suit that cost more than most people's cars. He didn't open the umbrella. He waited for the valet to do it. Inside the restaurant, sitting at their usual corner table, the one reserved for the city's elite, sat Madeline. She looked at her watch. He was 40 minutes late. "Traffic," Henry muttered, as he slid into the booth, not bothering to kiss her cheek. He signaled the sommelier for a bottle of the 98 Petrus without asking her preference. Madeline folded her hands on the white tablecloth. She was 52, wearing a sensible navy dress that Henry had told her twice. That morning looked drab. She had laugh lines around her eyes that Henry despised, and grey streaks in her hair that she refused to colour. "Happy anniversary, Henry," she said softly. 30 years. They had been married in a courthouse in Queens when they were both 22, eating hot dogs on a park bench afterward, because they couldn't afford dinner. Henry took a sip of the wine the moment it was poured, grimacing slightly. He reached into his jacket pocket. Madeline's heart fluttered. A gift? Perhaps he remembered the pearl earrings she had admired in the window of Tiffany's last month. He slid a thick manila envelope across the table. It knocked over the salt shaker. "I'm not going to drag this out, Maddie," Henry said, his voice devoid of any warmth. It was his boardroom voice, the voice he used when firing VP-level executives. "I've outgrown this. We've outgrown this." Madeline stared at the envelope. "What is this?" "Divorce papers, irreconcilable differences." He cut into his steak, which had arrived with suspicious speed. "I'm being generous. You get the house in Connecticut, the Audi, and a monthly stipend of 10 grand. It's more than you need." 10,000, Madeline whispered. "Henry, our monthly expenses for the charity foundation alone are—" "My charity foundation," he corrected, pointing his steak knife at her. "And the stipend is conditional on you signing by Friday. If you fight me, Patrick Cole, you know Patrick, the shark, he'll bury you. You'll get nothing." Madeline didn't touch the envelope. She looked at the man she had built a life with. She remembered when he was crying on the floor of their studio apartment because he'd lost his first job, and she had taken an extra shift at the diner to pay the rent. "Is it her?" Madeline asked, her voice steady. Henry sighed, dabbing his mouth with a linen napkin. "If you mean Tiffany, yes. She understands my world, Maddie. She fits the image of Prescott Global. You're wonderful with the gardening and the books, but you don't fit the magazine covers anymore." "I see," Madeline said. She didn't cry. That was the first shock for Henry, though he didn't register it at the time. He expected tears, begging, a scene he could sneer at. Instead, she just reached out, took the envelope, and placed it in her purse. "I'll have my lawyer look at this." Henry laughed, a short, barking sound. "Your lawyer? Who, old man? Abernathy, who did our wills 10 years ago. Maddie, don't embarrass yourself. I built an empire. You just lived in it. He threw a platinum credit card on the table. Pay the bill. I have a flight to Milan tonight. Tiffany is modeling in a show there. He stood up and walked out, leaving his wife of 30 years alone with a $3,000 bottle of wine and the wreckage of her life. The next 3 months were a masterclass in public humiliation. Henry didn't just leave Madeline, he erased her. It started with the tabloids. The New York Post ran a front-page photo of Henry on a yacht in Saint-Tropez, his hand resting possessively on the bikini-clad hip of Tiffany Banks. Tiffany was 24, an Instagram model and brand ambassador, with a piercing laugh and a gaze that assessed everyone by their net worth. The headline read, "Billionaire upgrade. Prescott trades up." Henry was reveling in it. He brought Tiffany to the Prescott Global shareholder meetings. He installed her in the corner office that used to belong to the CFO, giving her the title of Chief Visionary Officer, a made-up role that allowed her to fire assistants she didn't like. At the Met Gala that year, Henry walked the red carpet in a velvet tuxedo, with Tiffany draped over him in a sheer dress that left nothing to the imagination. When a reporter from Vanity Fair asked about his wife, Henry smirked into the microphone. "Madeline and I are separating amicably," he lied smoothly. "She prefers the quiet life. Honestly, she never really understood the complexities of a billion-dollar enterprise. It's better this way. I need a partner who can keep up with my speed." Tiffany giggled, leaning into the mic. "Henry's just too fast for anyone else. We're building the future together." Meanwhile, Madeline Prescott had vanished. She wasn't seen at the country club. She wasn't at the charity galas she had organized for 15 years. Rumors swirled that she had had a breakdown, or that she was hiding away in the Connecticut house, drowning her sorrows in Chardonnay. But the truth was far colder. Madeline wasn't in Connecticut. She was in a small, dimly lit office in a strip mall in New Jersey, sitting across from a man who looked nothing like a high-powered attorney. Simon Fletcher was wearing a rumpled cardigan and eating a tuna sandwich. He was Madeline's cousin, a man who specialized in contract law and patent disputes, mostly for small businesses. He wasn't a shark. He was a tortoise. "He's offering $2 million as a lump sum settlement now," Simon said, adjusting his glasses. "Henry's lawyer, Patrick Cole, sent over a threatening letter this morning. They're saying if we don't sign by the court date next week, they'll release damaging information about your mental health." Madeline took a sip of her lukewarm tea. "Let them threaten, Simon. Did you find it?" Simon looked down at the stack of yellowed, brittle papers on his desk. He smiled, and for a second, the mild-mannered lawyer looked dangerous. "I found it, Maddie. It took me digging through the archives of the Delaware Secretary of State from 1994, and I had to cross-reference it with the original acquisition filings of the logistics subsidiary. But yes, I found it. And it's bulletproof," Simon said. "Henry was so busy trying to dodge taxes in the late 90s that he got sloppy with the restructuring. He moved the assets, but he never dissolved the primary holding shell." Madeline's eyes hardened. "Does he know?" "There is no way he remembers," Simon said. "He thinks he is the sun, and everything revolves around him. He doesn't look at the foundation of the house, he just looks at the view from the penthouse." "Good." Madeline stood up, smoothing her skirt. "File the response. We reject the settlement. We'll see him in court." The week before the trial, the atmosphere in Henry's penthouse at 432 Park Avenue was electric with arrogance. Patrick Cole, Henry's attorney, was pacing the floor. Cole was known as the Butcher of Broadway. He charged $500 an hour and had never lost a high-profile divorce case. "She rejected the deal," Cole said, sounding more amused than annoyed. She actually rejected it. Henry laughed, swirling a glass of scotch. Tiffany was on the sofa, scrolling through comments on her latest selfie. "She's bluffing," Henry said dismissively. "She wants 5 million, maybe 10. She thinks because she was there when I started the company in the garage, she's entitled to half." "Does she have anything on the Cayman accounts?" Cole asked, his eyes narrowing. "Impossible," Henry waved a hand. "My CFO, Marcus, who I pay very well to keep his mouth shut, buried those layers deep. Madeline can barely operate an iPhone, Patrick. She's not going to unravel a complex offshore tax haven structure. She's a housewife. She bakes cookies. She doesn't audit ledgers." "Boring," Tiffany chimed in, not looking up from her phone. "Just crush her, Harry. I want that Connecticut house. The lighting in the master bath is perfect for my tutorials." "You'll have it, babe," Henry promised. The day of the deposition arrived first. It was a formality, usually. Henry sat at the head of the long mahogany table in Cole's glass-walled conference room. Madeline sat at the other end, flanked only by Simon Fletcher in his ill-fitting suit. Henry spent the entire 3 hours checking his watch and rolling his eyes. When Simon asked questions, they seemed oddly specific and boring. "Mr. Prescott," Simon asked, his voice shaking slightly. "In 1998, when Prescott Logistics was rebranded to Prescott Global, did you personally sign the transfer of deed?" "I sign 1,000 things a year," Henry snapped. "My legal team handled it." "And do you recognize this document?" Simon slid a piece of paper across the table. Henry glanced at it. It was a photocopy of an old memorandum of association. Standard boilerplate trash. Next question. "Did you read the clause on page 4, subsection C?" "I don't read the fine print, Mr. Fletcher. I pay people to do that. And clearly, you're wasting my time with 20-year-old paperwork because you have no leverage on the current assets." Patrick Cole leaned in. "Move on, Fletcher. Unless you have proof my client is hiding assets currently, ancient history is irrelevant. The statute of limitations on clerical errors expired a decade ago." Simon closed his folder. He looked at Madeline. She gave a microscopic nod. "No further questions," Simon said. Henry stood up, buttoning his jacket. He looked at Madeline with a mix of pity and disgust. "You should have taken the money, Maddie. Now I'm going to destroy you in open court. It's going to be public. It's going to be ugly. And you're going to leave with nothing but the clothes on your back." Madeline finally spoke. Her voice was calm, clear, and terrifyingly cold. "Bring your mistress to court, Henry. I want her to see it." Henry laughed. "Oh, she'll be there. She's planning her outfit right now." Camera flashes exploded like strobe lights against the grey morning sky as the black SUV convoy arrived at the Supreme Court of New York. The press had gathered in droves. A divorce involving a $4 billion estate was rare. One involving a billionaire who was openly parading his 24-year-old mistress around town was a circus. Henry Prescott stepped onto the pavement as if he were stepping onto a yacht. He paused, buttoning his suit jacket, allowing the photographers to get the perfect shot. He wasn't just attending a trial, he was attending his coronation as a single man. Tiffany Banks slid out behind him. She was wearing a white dress that was theoretically business casual, but the hemline was aggressively short, and the neckline plunged deep enough to make the bailiffs blush. She wore oversized sunglasses, clutching Henry's arm with a possessive grip. "Henry, Henry, is it true you're offering her 0? A reporter from TMZ shouted. Henry stopped, flashing a veneer-perfect smile. "I believe in fairness," he boomed, his voice carrying over the crowd. "But I also believe that people should be compensated for the value they actually create. I built Prescott Global. I'm just here to correct the paperwork." Tiffany giggled, whispering something in his ear, and they ascended the stairs like royalty. 10 minutes later, a rusted 2014 Honda Civic pulled up to the side entrance. No cameras turned. No reporters shouted. Madeline Prescott stepped out, holding a simple black umbrella. She wore the same navy suit she had worn to her son's graduation 5 years ago. Simon Fletcher, her lawyer, struggled to get out of the driver's seat, dropping his briefcase on a puddle. "Damn it," Simon muttered, wiping mud off the leather. Madeline placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's just mud, Simon. It washes off. Dirt like Henry. That's harder to clean." Inside courtroom 4B, the atmosphere was stifling. The gallery was packed. Junior analysts from Wall Street were there to see if the stock price would tank. Gossip columnists were there to critique Tiffany's outfit. When Henry and Tiffany entered, they didn't just sit. They sprawled. Henry took the defendant's chair, leaning back, checking messages on his phone. Tiffany sat in the front row of the gallery, directly behind him, crossing her legs and audibly chewing gum. Madeline and Simon sat at the plaintiff's table. They looked small, insignificant. Simon was shuffling papers, his hands trembling slightly. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Holloway entered. He was a man of 60, with a face carved from granite and a reputation for having zero tolerance for theatrics. He sat down, adjusted his spectacles, and glared over the rim at the packed room. "This is a courtroom, not a cabaret," Judge Holloway rumbled, his eyes landing squarely on Tiffany. "If there are any disruptions from the gallery, I will clear it. Are we understood?" Tiffany stopped chewing her gum, shrinking slightly under the judge's gaze. Henry merely smirked, drumming his fingers on the table. "Mr. Cole," the judge nodded to Henry's lawyer, "you may begin your opening statement." Patrick Cole stood up. He didn't walk, he prowled. He adjusted his silk tie and turned to face the room, ignoring the judge and addressing the audience. "Your Honor," Cole began, his voice smooth as velvet, "we are here today to discuss a tragedy. Not the tragedy of a marriage ending, but the tragedy of a parasite killing its host." A gasp went through the room. Madeline stared straight ahead, her face a mask. "My client, Henry Prescott, is a visionary," Cole continued, pacing. "He works 18-hour days. He takes risks that would stop a lesser man's heart. He has generated billions in revenue, employed thousands of people, and changed the technological landscape of this country." "And what was Mrs. Prescott doing during this time?" Cole paused for dramatic effect, pointing a finger at Madeline. "She was gardening. She was hosting tea parties. She was spending his money. Now she comes before this court asking for half of an empire she couldn't even begin to comprehend. We intend to prove that Madeline Prescott's contribution to the marriage was negligible, and her contribution to the business was non-existent. We will offer her a fair settlement for her domestic services. But the company belongs to the man who built it." Cole sat down, looking satisfied. Henry gave him a subtle fist bump under the table. Simon Fletcher stood up. He looked disheveled next to Cole's sleek presentation. "Your Honor," Simon said, his voice cracking slightly, We intend to prove that marriage is a partnership, and that contracts matter." "Thank you." He sat down immediately. Henry laughed out loud. It was a short, sharp bark of amusement. He leaned over to Cole. "That's it? That's his opening. I'm going to be at lunch by noon." The morning session was a bloodbath. Patrick Cole called witness after witness to paint Madeline as a detached, incompetent housewife. The housekeeper testified that Madeline rarely cooked. The travel agent testified that Madeline spent thousands on unnecessary trips to visit art museums. Then Cole called Henry Prescott to the stand. Henry walked to the witness box with a swagger. He took the oath as if he were doing the Bible a favor. "Mr. Prescott," Cole asked, leaning on the railing, "explain to the court the structure of Prescott Global." Henry smiled. This was his favorite topic. Himself. "It's a multinational conglomerate," Henry lectured, turning to the judge. "We have 3 main verticals: logistics, tech development, and real estate. I personally oversee all acquisitions. I designed the algorithm that optimized our shipping routes in 2005, saving the company $40 million a year. I negotiated the merger with Omnicorp." "And your wife?" Cole asked. "What role did she play in the algorithm design?" "Madeline?" Henry chuckled. "Madeline thinks Java is just coffee. No, she played no role. 0. In fact, her constant nagging about my work hours was a detriment. If I had listened to her, we'd still be a trucking company in Queens." "So, you would say you are the sole architect of the company's success?" "I am the company," Henry stated flatly. "Prescott Global is me. Without me, it's just a building with desks." "Thank you, Mr. Prescott." Cole sat down, looking at the judge as if to say, "Case closed." "Mr. Fletcher," Judge Holloway said, looking at the frantic little lawyer, "your witness." Simon Fletcher stood up. He picked up a stack of files, dropped one, apologized, picked it up, and walked to the podium. Henry rolled his eyes, checking his watch. "Mr. Prescott," Simon began, adjusting his glasses, "you stated that you are the solely responsible party for the company's success?" "I did," Henry said, bored. "And you handle all the high-level financials? The structural organization?" "Of course, I'm the CEO." Right. Simon shuffled his papers. "I'd like to talk about 1994. Do you remember 1994, Mr. Prescott?" "Vaguely. I was working. Hard." "Yes. That was the year you were facing a massive lawsuit from a competitor, wasn't it? Red Star Shipping was suing you for patent infringement." Henry stiffened slightly. "That was a frivolous lawsuit. We settled." "You settled," Simon corrected. "But before you settled, you were terrified of losing everything, weren't you? You were afraid Red Star would seize your assets." "I was engaging in asset protection. It's standard business practice," Henry snapped. "Standard business practice," Simon repeated. "And as part of this protection, you restructured the company. You moved the ownership of your logistics firm into a holding company to shield it from liability. Is that correct?" Patrick Cole stood up. "Objection. Relevance. This is 30-year-old history." "I'll allow it," Judge Holloway said, leaning forward. "I'm curious where he's going with this." Simon continued. "You created a holding company called Silver Lake Holdings, LLC, in Delaware. You transferred 100% of the shares of your company into Silver Lake, correct?" Henry shrugged. "Sure. A shell company. We dissolved it years ago." "Did you?" Simon asked softly. The room went quiet. The air-conditioning hum sounded like a jet engine. Henry frowned. "Of course we did. When we rebranded to Prescott Global in 1998, we moved everything over." "How?" Simon asked. "What do you mean, how?" Henry was getting annoyed. "We just did it. I told my lawyers to consolidate the assets under the new ticker symbol." "You told your lawyers?" Simon nodded. "But, Mr. Prescott, did you ever sign a transfer of ownership deed, moving the assets out of Silver Lake Holdings and into your personal name or the new public entity?" "I signed thousands of papers," Henry shouted. "I don't remember every single document from 20 years ago." Simon turned back to his table and picked up a single, yellowed piece of paper. It was encased in a plastic protective sleeve. "Your Honor," Simon said, his voice suddenly losing all its tremor. It became strong, resonant. I would like to submit Exhibit A into evidence. He walked the paper over to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. This, Simon said, turning to look Henry in the eye, is the article of incorporation for Silver Lake Holdings, dated June 14th, 1994, and attached is the beneficial ownership clause. Judge Halloway put on his reading glasses. He read the document. He paused. He read it again. He looked up at Henry, then at Madeline, who was sitting perfectly still, her hands folded. Mr. Prescott, Simon continued, in 1994 you had bad credit. You had a lawsuit pending. You couldn't be the listed officer of the holding company. So you needed a proxy. Someone you trusted implicitly. Someone who wasn't being sued. Henry's face went pale beneath his spray tan. You put the holding company in your wife's name, Simon said. That was a formality, Henry yelled, gripping the railing. It was just on paper. It means nothing. Actually, Simon smiled, and it was the smile of a predator who had finally trapped its prey. It means everything. Because, Mr. Prescott, I have also subpoenaed the dissolution records from Delaware, or rather, the lack thereof. Simon picked up another document. Silver Lake Holdings was never dissolved, and according to the filings for Prescott Global, the parent entity is listed as Silver Lake Holdings. Tiffany, sensing the shift in the room, stood up in the gallery. What does that mean? Harry, what does he mean? Sit down, the bailiff barked. It means, Simon said, his voice ringing through the silent courtroom, that technically, Prescott Global doesn't own itself. Silver Lake Holdings owns Prescott Global, and we are here to determine who owns Silver Lake. Patrick Cole was on his feet, his face red. Objection. This is an ambush. We haven't seen these documents. They are public record, Mr. Cole, Judge Halloway said, his voice icy. If you didn't find them, that speaks to your competence, not the admissibility of the evidence. Sit down. The judge turned his gaze to Henry. Mr. Prescott, answer the question. Who owns Silver Lake Holdings? Henry was sweating now. Beads of perspiration were breaking through his makeup. I do. In spirit. It was my money. Madeline just signed the paper because I asked her to. She doesn't know anything about business. Let's look at the document, Simon said, walking closer to the witness stand. Clause 4A. The primary beneficiary and sole proprietor of Silver Lake Holdings shall be Madeline Prescott, with full executive power to appoint or remove officers of any subsidiary entities. Simon let that hang in the air. Full executive power, Simon repeated. To appoint or remove officers. Henry laughed nervously. This is ridiculous. It's a clerical error. I've been running the company for 30 years. Madeline has never attended a board meeting, squatters' rights, or implied consent. She let me run it. She did, Simon agreed. She let you run it, as an employee of Silver Lake Holdings. I am the CEO, Henry screamed, slamming his hand on the wood. I am the founder. You are a manager, Simon corrected, and you serve at the pleasure of the owner. Simon turned to the judge. Your Honor, our argument is simple. Mr. Prescott is asking for a divorce. He is asking to split the marital assets. We agree, but we contend that the primary asset, the company, is not a marital asset to be split. It is the sole, separate property of Madeline Prescott, established prior to the company's explosive growth and maintained under her name for 3 decades. This is insanity, Henry shouted, looking at his lawyer. Patrick, do something. Patrick Cole looked like he had swallowed a lemon. He was frantically scrolling through his tablet, looking for a loophole, sweat dripping onto his expensive suit. We request a recess, Cole stammered. to review the validity of this document?" "Denied," Judge Holloway said instantly. "You've had 6 months of discovery. Proceed, Mr. Fletcher." Simon turned back to Henry. "Mr. Prescott, you offered your wife a stipend of $10,000 a month. You told her she lived in your world. But in reality, you have been living in her house, spending her money, and using her company to fund your lifestyle." Simon pointed to the gallery, where Tiffany was now looking at her phone, frantically texting. "You used company funds, Madeline's company funds, to buy the apartment for Ms. Banks, didn't you?" "It's my money," Henry roared. "I earned it. Did you seek approval from the sole proprietor of Silver Lake Holdings before diverting $2 million of capital to a personal acquaintance? I don't need approval. Actually, you do. Under corporate embezzlement laws, diverting funds from a holding company for personal use without the owner's consent is a felony. But we aren't here for criminal charges today. We're just here for the divorce." Simon walked back to his table and looked at Madeline. She hadn't moved. She hadn't smiled. She was watching Henry unravel with a terrifying calmness. "No further questions for this witness," Simon said. Henry stood there, panting, his tie loosened, his hair slightly askew. He looked less like a billionaire and more like a man realizing the floor had just vanished beneath his feet. "You can step down, Mr. Prescott," the judge said with disdain. Henry stumbled back to his table. He grabbed Patrick Cole by the arm. "Fix this," he hissed. "Fix this now, or I will ruin you." "I can't fix a 30-year-old paper trail, Henry," Cole hissed back, his whisper harsh. "Why didn't you tell me the IP was held in a shell?" "I forgot," Henry whispered, shrieked. "It was the 90s. Everyone was doing it." "Well," Cole grimaced, "it looks like Madeline didn't forget." The judge cleared his throat. "Ms. Prescott, please take the stand." Madeline stood up. The silence in the room was heavy, thick with anticipation. She walked to the stand, not with a strut, but with a steady, graceful rhythm. She placed her hand on the Bible. "Do you swear to tell the truth?" "I do," she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried to the back of the room. Simon approached her gently. "Mrs. Prescott, you heard your husband claim that you were merely a placeholder for the company, that you had no involvement. Is that true?" Madeline looked at Henry. For the first time, emotion flickered in her eyes. Not anger. Disappointment. "I wasn't a placeholder, Simon," she said. "I was the safety net." "Can you explain?" "Henry is brilliant," Madeline said, and the compliment hit Henry like a slap. "He is a visionary, but he is also reckless. In 1994, he wanted to mortgage our house to pay for a gamble on a tech startup. I told him no. He begged. So I made a deal with him. I told him I would sign the papers for the new structure, but I would keep the keys, just in case he crashed the car. And did he? He crashed the marriage," Madeline said simply. "He forgot that while he was building the walls of the castle, I owned the land it stood on. He thought because I was quiet, I was stupid. He thought because I was kind, I was weak." She turned to the judge. "I don't want his money, Your Honor. I don't want the penthouse or the yacht or the flashy cars. I just want what is mine. I want my company back, and I want him out of it." The courtroom erupted. Reporters were typing furiously. Tiffany Banks was already edging toward the exit, her phone to her ear, likely calling an Uber or a new billionaire. Henry sat frozen, his face a mask of pure horror. He wasn't looking at Madeline. He was looking at the future, and for the first time in his life, he saw absolutely nothing. The wooden gavel struck the sounding block, signaling the start of a 60-minute recess. To the spectators in the gallery, it was a lunch break. To Henry Prescott, it sounded like a gunshot. He didn't walk to the consultation room. He marched, his stride fueled by a cocktail of adrenaline and pure, unadulterated rage. He burst through the double doors of the private holding room, assigned to the defense, ripping his silk tie loose from his collar as if it were a noose choking the life out of him. Patrick Cole followed him in, closing the door softly. The contrast between the two men was stark. Henry was vibrating with kinetic energy, a nuclear reactor melting down. Cole was terrifyingly still, his face pale, the color of old parchment. He walked over to the sleek conference table, placed his briefcase down, and didn't open it. He just stared at the leather grain. "Fix this," Henry hissed. He wasn't shouting yet. The anger was too deep for volume. It was a low, guttural vibration in his chest. "You get back out there, and you file a motion. Any motion. Motion to dismiss. Motion to suppress evidence. I don't care if you have to invent a legal precedent from the Roman Empire, Patrick. You fix this." Cole slowly sat down. He removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Henry," he said, his voice flat, devoid of the confident, shark-like purr he had used all week. "There is nothing to fix. The document is authentic. I saw the seal. I saw the notarization stamp from 1994. It's real." "I don't care if it's real." Henry slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing off the bare walls. "It's a technicality. It's a piece of paper from 30 years ago that I signed when I was a nobody. I built this empire, me. My face is on the magazine covers. My brain designed the logistics network. Madeline she was just there. You can't let a clerical error take away $4 billion. It's not a clerical error." Cole looked up, his eyes cold. "It's a binding legal contract. And you know what the worst part is? You designed it." Henry froze. "What?" "You designed it to hide assets from Red Star Shipping," Cole explained, his tone bordering on cruel. "You wanted to make sure that if you were sued, you owned nothing. Well, congratulations, Henry. You succeeded. You own nothing." Henry stared at him, his mouth opening and closing. The reality was clawing at the edges of his mind, but his ego refused to let it in. He pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped it once, before unlocking the screen. "I'm moving the liquid cash," Henry muttered, tapping furiously. "I have 40 million in the operating account for the Switzerland expansion. I'm moving it to the Cayman shell. If she wants the company, she can have a hollow shell." "Don't," Cole warned, standing up. "Henry, if you touch those funds now, after the evidence has been presented, it's not just civil contempt, it's federal wire fraud. You will go to prison." "I'm already in prison," Henry screamed, finally losing control. "She's trapping me." He hit transfer on the banking app. A spinning wheel appeared on the screen. Henry held his breath. Error. Authorization failed. Account status frozen by administrative order. Contact system. Administrator S. Fletcher. Henry stared at the screen. "S. Fletcher," he whispered. "Simon. That little rat." He dialed his CFO, Marcus. Marcus had been his loyal attack dog for 15 years. Marcus knew where the bodies were buried. Marcus would override the freeze. The phone rang once, twice, then it went to voicemail. But it wasn't the standard voicemail. "You have reached the desk of Marcus Thorne. I am currently cooperating with an internal audit and cannot take calls from external parties. If this is regarding the Prescott transition, please contact the office of Madeline Prescott." Henry lowered the phone slowly. The silence in the small room was deafening. He felt a physical sensation of vertigo, as if the floor had dissolved into vapor. "They flipped him," Henry whispered, his voice trembling. "They got to Marcus." Cole sighed, snapping his briefcase shut. They didn't have to flip him, Henry. Marcus is a CFO. He follows the money. The money just changed owners. He's just doing his job. Henry slumped into a chair. For the first time in 20 years, he looked his age. The veneer of the titan, the billionaire playboy, the master of the universe. It was peeling away, revealing a terrified, middle-aged man who had forgotten how to survive without a golden parachute. "What do I do?" Henry asked, sounding like a child. "You go out there," Cole said, straightening his tie in the mirror, preparing to abandon the sinking ship with as much dignity as possible. "You sit down, and you pray she has mercy." The walk back into the courtroom felt like a funeral procession. The gallery was buzzing with a noise that sounded like a hive of angry hornets. Every seat was filled. People were standing in the back, craning their necks. The news had leaked during the recess. The Wall Street Journal had already pushed a notification. Prescott Global Ownership. Dispute. CEO may lose control. When Henry entered, the noise didn't stop. It shifted. Hundreds of eyes locked onto him. He was used to being looked at with envy. Now he saw something else. Derision. Pity. He looked toward the front row. He needed an anchor. He needed Tiffany. The seat was empty. His heart hammered against his ribs. He scanned the row. Her purse was gone. Her coat was gone. The only trace of Tiffany Banks was a faint smudge of lipstick on a discarded Starbucks cup left on the bench. "Where is she?" Henry muttered to the bailiff as he passed the gate. The bailiff, a burly man who had watched Henry strut around like a peacock for a week, didn't even try to hide his smirk. "She asked for an escort out the side door, Mr. Prescott. Said she didn't want to get caught in the splash zone." Henry sank into the defendant's chair. He felt naked. He looked across the aisle. Madeline was already seated. She was drinking water from a paper cup. She looked serene. There was no gloating in her posture. She wasn't high-fiving Simon Fletcher. She was reading a document, underlining something calmly with a blue pen. She looked like a CEO reviewing a quarterly report. She looked like she belonged there. "All rise." Judge Holloway swept into the room. The air pressure seemed to drop. He sat down, adjusted his robe, and placed a single sheet of paper in the center of his desk. He didn't look at the lawyers. He looked at the gallery. "If I hear a single camera shutter, a single cell phone, or a single outburst," Holloway rumbled, his voice echoing off the mahogany panels, "I will have this courtroom cleared by the U.S. Marshals. Is that understood?" Silence. Absolute, pin-drop silence. "Mr. Cole," the judge turned to the defense table. "Do you have any counter-evidence to the document labeled Exhibit A regarding the ownership of Silver Lake Holdings?" Patrick Cole stood up. He didn't look at Henry. "Your Honor, the defense has no further evidence at this time." "We rest," Henry gasped. "Patrick," he whispered harshly, "fight him." "And you, Mr. Fletcher?" Simon stood up. He looked taller than he had at the start of the trial. "We rest, Your Honor. The document speaks for itself." Judge Holloway nodded. He picked up the paper. He put on his reading glasses. He took a long, agonizingly slow sip of water. "In the matter of Prescott vs. Prescott," Holloway began, his voice steady and authoritative, "the court is presented with a highly unusual, yet legally straightforward set of facts. We have a marital dissolution case that has unmasked a corporate governance crisis." He looked over his glasses at Henry. "Mr. Prescott, you have built a public persona based on the idea that you are the sole creator and owner of Prescott Global. You have testified under oath that your wife was merely a domestic partner with no interest or involvement in your business affairs." Holloway paused, letting the words hang there. "However," he continued. "The law does not care about personas. The law cares about contracts. The Articles of Incorporation for Silver Lake Holdings, dated 1994, are unambiguous. The entity was established with Madeline Prescott as the sole signatory and beneficiary. Crucially, the transfer of assets from your previous ventures into this holding company was executed voluntarily by you, Mr. Prescott, to avoid liability in the Red Star lawsuit." The judge leaned forward. "You used your wife as a shield, sir. You hid behind her name to protect your money. You cannot now claim that the shield does not exist simply because the danger has passed. You pierced the corporate veil to save yourself in 1994. You cannot stitch it back together in 2024 because it is inconvenient." Henry felt sweat trickling down his back. "He's saying it," he thought. "He's actually saying it." "Therefore," Holloway declared, "the court finds that the assets held by Silver Lake Holdings, specifically the controlling interest in Prescott Global, are the separate property of Madeline Prescott. They are not marital property subject to division." A collective intake of breath swept through the room. "As for the marital assets," the judge continued, "the penthouse, the yacht, the collection of vintage Ferraris, the evidence shows these were purchased using funds drawn from Silver Lake accounts. Since Mr. Prescott was not an authorized officer of Silver Lake, but merely an employee of its subsidiary, these withdrawals constitute unauthorized use of company funds." Henry gripped the table. "I earned that money," he shouted, unable to stop himself. "Sit down, Mr. Prescott," Holloway barked. "You earned a salary you set for yourself. Anything beyond that salary requires board approval. And since the board is, effectively, your wife, and she did not approve these purchases, those assets are ordered to be returned to the company ledger immediately." "You're stripping me," Henry whispered, his voice cracking. "You're taking everything." "I am taking nothing, Mr. Prescott," Holloway said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "I am simply returning property to its rightful owner. You walked into this marriage with a 1990 Honda Civic and $40,000 in student debt. According to the equitable distribution laws of this state, you are entitled to leave with the value of what you brought in, plus a fair share of the actual marital savings, which, according to your own tax returns, is negligible, since you spent everything on lifestyle maintenance." The judge signed the paper with a flourish. "The divorce is granted. Mrs. Prescott retains full ownership of Silver Lake and its subsidiaries. Mr. Prescott is ordered to vacate the premises of Prescott Global and surrender all company property, including vehicles and electronics, by 5:00 p.m. today. Court is adjourned." The gavel came down. Bang! The sound marked the end of an era. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters were shouting questions over the railing. "Henry, Henry, are you bankrupt? Madeline, are you going to sell the company?" Henry didn't move. He sat frozen, staring at the empty wood grain of the table. He felt a hand on his shoulder. He looked up, expecting Patrick Cole. But Cole was gone. He had packed up and vanished the moment the gavel hit, likely already drafting a press release to distance his firm from the disaster. It wasn't Cole. It was a bailiff. "Sir, you need to clear the table. We have another trial in 30 minutes. Henry stood up, shakily. His legs felt like jelly. He grabbed his jacket. He turned to leave, but his path was blocked. Madeline was standing there. She wasn't blocking him aggressively. She was just standing in the aisle, flanked by Simon Fletcher. The crowd parted around them, sensing the gravity of the moment. The cameras were zooming in. This was the shot they wanted. The confrontation. Henry looked at his wife, really looked at her. He saw the grey streaks in her hair that he had mocked. He saw the sensible shoes he had hated, but he also saw the steel in her spine. He realized with a sickening jolt that she looked powerful. "Maddie," Henry said. His voice was a rasp. He tried to summon his old charm, the smile that had closed billion-dollar deals. "Maddie, look, this got out of hand. The lawyers, they twist things. We can fix this. You don't know how to run a global tech conglomerate. You need me. The shareholders need me. Let's go get dinner. Let's talk about this like adults." He reached out to touch her arm. Madeline took a half step back. She didn't flinch. She just moved out of his reach. "I don't need you, Henry," she said. Her voice was not loud, but in the hush of the courtroom, it carried like a bell. "I never needed you. I needed a partner. You wanted a fan." She reached into a plain leather handbag. Henry flinched, his eyes darting to her hands. She pulled out a white envelope. It was thick. It had the Prescott Global logo embossed on the corner, the logo Henry had paid a design firm $2 million to create. "What is that?" Henry asked. "Simon." Madeline nodded to her lawyer. Simon stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. He didn't look like a nervous, small-town lawyer anymore. He looked like the consigliere of a new regime. "Mr. Prescott," Simon said formally, "this is official notice of your termination from Prescott Global, effective immediately. The board, meaning Mrs. Prescott, has voted to remove you for cause." "For cause?" Henry laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "I am the founder." "The causes listed," Simon continued, ignoring the outburst, "include embezzlement of company funds, gross negligence of fiduciary duty, and reputational damage to the brand due to your public conduct." Madeline extended the envelope. Henry didn't take it. She placed it gently on the defendant's table next to him. "Your security clearance has been revoked," Madeline said. "Your company phone has been remotely wiped. The car outside, the Maybach, the driver has instructions to take you to your apartment and then return the vehicle to the corporate garage. You have 1 hour to pack your personal effects from the office." Henry felt tears stinging his eyes, angry, hot tears. "You can't do this. I am Henry Prescott. The world knows my name." "They know your name, Henry," Madeline said softly, "but they're about to learn mine." She turned to walk away, then stopped. She turned back, her expression softening just a fraction, not with kindness, but with pity. "Oh, and Henry?" "What?" he snapped, his face streaked with sweat. "I'm keeping the dog," she said. "Barnaby hates the smell of your cologne anyway." She turned and walked down the center aisle. The doors swung open, and the bright white light of the camera flashes swallowed her whole. She didn't look back. Henry stood in the courtroom for a long time. The bailiffs were sweeping the floor. The stenographer was packing up her machine. He walked out the side door, avoiding the press. He stepped out onto the wet pavement of the alleyway. It was raining again. He reached into his pocket for his phone to call for a car. He tapped the Uber app. Payment method declined. He tapped his American Express app. Account suspended. He stared at the screen. He looked up at the street. A yellow taxi splashed through a puddle, soaking the cuffs of his $3,000 trousers. He saw a figure under the awning of a coffee shop across the street. It was a young woman with blonde hair. For a second, his heart leapt. "Tiffany?" The woman turned. It wasn't her. It was just a stranger. Henry realized then that Tiffany hadn't just left. She had been erased. She was a symptom of the disease that was his vanity. And now that the host was dead, the parasite had moved on. He reached into his pocket and found a crumpled $20 bill, enough for a subway ride to Queens. 6 months later, the boardroom on the 40th floor of the Prescott Tower was quiet. The glass walls offered a panoramic view of Manhattan, the city that Henry Prescott used to think he owned. Madeline sat at the head of the table. She wasn't wearing a power suit. She was wearing a soft cashmere sweater and pearls. The room was full of serious men and women in suits, the new board of directors. "The numbers for Q3 look promising," Simon Fletcher said from the seat to her right. "Since we liquidated the luxury division and reinvested in the green logistics grid, overhead is down 40%. "Good," Madeline said. Her voice was decisive. "Let's approve the employee profit-sharing plan. If they build it, they should own a piece of it. It's only fair." The board members nodded. There was no fear in the room. There was respect. Miles away, in a cramped apartment above a laundromat in Astoria, Queens, Henry Prescott sat in the dark. The apartment smelled of stale takeout and damp drywall. His bespoke suits were jammed into a closet that was too small, wrinkling and gathering dust. He was sitting in front of a cheap laptop, the blue light illuminating his face. He was typing a comment on a YouTube video, a video titled "The Rise of Madeline Prescott." User: King Harry 99 typed, "She stole it. She knows nothing. The company will crash in a month without the visionary behind it. Just watch." He hit enter. Nobody liked the comment. Nobody replied. Henry refreshed the page. He refreshed it again. On the screen, an ad played before the next video. It was a commercial for Prescott Global. The voiceover was warm, inviting. Prescott Global, moving the world forward. Together. Henry stared at the screen, at the company logo he had chosen, now representing a future he was no longer part of. He closed the laptop, plunging the room into darkness, and listened to the sound of the rain against the window. It sounded exactly like the rain on the day he had asked for a divorce. The only difference was, this time, he had no umbrella. And there you have it, the story of Henry Prescott, a man who thought he was playing chess, only to realize his wife owned the board, the pieces, and the table they were playing on. It's a harsh reminder that in the game of life, arrogance is the most expensive luxury of all. Henry traded a diamond for a rhinestone, and in the end, he was left with nothing but his own reflection. It goes to show that the quietest person in the room is often the one you need to watch the most. If this story of karma and justice gave you chills, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button right now. It helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. And if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. What would you have done if you were Madeline? Would you have fired him or taken the money? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.